Welcome to the International Open Seminar on Semiotics. It is also a tribute to John Deely, almost on the 6th anniversary of his passing. And today we are very glad because we have here a very special presentation, lecture entitled The Agonistic Dimension of Peircean Semiotics and its Postmodern Interpretations. And this presentation, this talk, this lecture will be given by Dr. Ionut Untea. Thank you very much, Dr. Untea, for accepting our invitation. It is really a great pleasure to have you here. And we are also very glad to receive here Dr. Elize Bisanz. She will be the commentator of today's session. Thank you very much, Dr. Bisanz, for accepting our invitation. So this year we are starting this new year in a brilliant way with full of brilliant presentations. So let's start. I will start by introducing Dr. Untea, and then later I will introduce the commentator. So Dr. Ionut Untea is currently a fellow in residence at the Académie Scolaire Solitude in Stuttgart, where he is researching on the semiotic and aesthetic coordinates of the social compact and intercorporeal relationships. In 2021, he has taught a course entitled Intercultural Philosophy, Semiotic Approach and Aesthetic Themes as a visiting professor at the Università degli Studi di Bari Aldo Moro. Since 2016, he has been teaching history of Western philosophy and semiotics at Southeast University in Nanjing. He previously taught at the University of La Rochelle and was a postdoctoral fellow of the Foundation for Interreligious and Intercultural Research and Dialogue at the University of Geneva. He obtained his doctorate in 2013 at École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris. He holds Romanian citizenship, having obtained his first degrees in philosophy and theology at the University of Bucharest. His focus is on the modern and contemporary intersections between semiotic, moral, political, and religious thought. He has published recently Peircean and Confucian interpretations of self-development, semiotic, normative, and aesthetic aspects. His recent work has appeared in academic journals such as the American Journal of Semiotics, Semiotica, Ethical Perspectives, Philosophical Forum, Journal of Aesthetic Education, Politics and Religion, and the Monist. So, Dr. Untea, welcome. Thank you again, and you can start your talk.
Thank you, William, for your introduction, and thank you. I would like to thank all the organizers for inviting me, giving me the honor to participate in this amazing open seminar. And yeah, first, before I start, I would like to share a PowerPoint. Sorry, share. Please bear with me a little bit. All right. Okay. So before I start, I just want to mention a few things, technical, methodological things. This is Elize must have had a headache with my text. It's quite a long and a little bit convoluted text. And yeah, I would like to ask for your patience. Actually, there's a lot of the text, as you can see in my PowerPoint. The most important thing is not to focus on the details, but the most important thing is to focus on the overall discussion. The most important thing, the goal here is to celebrate the work, the personality of this great semiotician, John Deely. And sometimes I will be criticizing a little bit John Deely's arguments. Sometimes I will praise. Yeah, it's the usual stuff in the academic work. So let's begin. Another thing is, yeah, perhaps my presentation will start a little bit slow at the beginning, perhaps, and then it will, I hope at least, will become a little more and more dynamic towards the end. I will try to communicate as fast as possible because I don't want to waste your precious time. So let's see. In the introductory discussion, I will go. Perhaps many of you know that John Deely, using in an article in 2001, Physiosemiosis in the Semiotic Spiral, he used some observations made by Mats Bergman, and he argues that, and this is something that is known to many people, Peirce made a shift in a recasting of the notion of interpretant from a nominalist orientation to a rather realistic one. And the consequence of all this, according to John Deely, is that the interpretant reveals, in this, the second use of Peirce reveals what John Deely calls the causality truly proper to science. And this causality is extrinsic to the subjectivity of a knower. So therefore, we have the difference between interpretant on one hand and interpretation on another hand, because interpretation is not interpretant. So when that is why, no matter how advanced our knowledge about this world is, no matter how advanced the interpretation, the contact with reality is, with the semiosis at work in reality is, human knowledge will always be an interpretation. So, and Peirce is aware of this, and he argues that he sees the world as some kind of theater of controversy. And anyway, so Peirce uses the notion of theater of controversy and theater of consciousness, theater of, if I remember well, the confrontation of clash of particles. So the idea of this metaphor of theater of controversy is quite well acknowledged by Peirce. So when two such subjective knowers who are coming into controversy on this kind of stage or theater, or the stage of a theater, the winning opinion usually is considered the final interpretant, right? And this is actually in the more time goes, this winning opinion perhaps will be, yes, in the language of Popper, falsified and would be considered merely an interpretation. A new final interpretation are established, and this is, according to Peirce, that is very, is compatible with Peirce's thought, who thinks that on the long term, people will agree on what the truth, the pragmatic truth in a society, at least, how the way the pragmatic truth will look like. Now, okay, this is the classical idea, but I would like to problematize this, what I have just said, and ask if there is a causality truly proper to the sign, and a causality truly proper to interpretation, or causality truly proper to the theater, to the structure itself of the theater. So there's already different kinds of causalities. What is the relation between the theater and its causality, and the being of the sign and its own causality? And now there's a text in which John Deely seems to have, let's say, I don't know how to use the word, maybe failed to acknowledge what his own argument has emphasized. So perhaps many of you know that the example of the witches of Salem is something present in John Deely. He mentioned in his arguments several times this example of the witches of Salem, who were burned. Actually, he says, well, not quite burned, or just lynched, or anyway, they were lynched, or their life was terminated. So I quote, "If today we no longer burn witches, it is not that our ancestors succeeded in getting them all so much as it is a sea change in socially permissible beliefs upon which the law is deemed able to act." So now, can the causality truly proper to science, which is this causality, as I said, which is contained interpretant that Deely talks about, conserve the independence of the object of the sign, in case the witch, conserve its independence when the object of the sign, the socially accepted object, which is the witch, seems to be embedded in a kind of social structure, and the shifts within social structure may have a serious impact on the life of the sign. So this is the core of my argument, which is an original argument. You can agree or disagree with it. I have no problem about this. So the overall thesis of this discussion is that there is and there will always be a tension in the semiosis at work in the world, a tension between the sign's own dynamics and dynamics of the external settings. And this I have called agon, and I have been inspired by this, of course, the Greek, the ancient Greek word which emphasized a state of a dynamism, a dynamism which emphasizes both competition, play, and but which is a healthy dynamism, creative dynamism. The way Deely will say, and I will insist on this, he will say we don't have only degeneration, we have pregeneration. So agonism is in this sense of a dynamic pregenerative tension, and without this tension there is no creative work at the level of the semiosis. Okay. Now, I will again, I will insist a little bit more on this ambiguous phrase. I think it is ambiguous when he says sea change, because he uses a metaphor. He could have said it in some other way. So the question is this sea change demanded by the causality proper to sign? Is demanded by the individual consciousness which are engaged in the agonistic relations on that theater of controversy? Or maybe a consequence of the very impersonal shifts in the way the structure, the theater itself is structured. And this, yes, we have to think about Foucault's argument, Foucault's notion of episteme. So there is no real subject, but the shifts in episteme generates shifts in the subjective interpretations of the world. So from this point of view, structuralism has been defined as a Cartesianism without the subject. So this is where the tricky part of Cartesianism comes into play, because even if we get rid of the subject, we still have Cartesianism without the subject, because the almighty reason, the almighty cogito is still there, even if the subject is not. And we can find, let's see, remnants of Cartesianism, even at the level of Peirce's work. Peirce focuses on agapism, and I will insist on this on the next slide. And for Peirce, agapism magically overlooks the tension and, as I said, this agon, the clashes between the interpretant and the settings. For Peirce, the core of this, the way, in a way, agapism solves this tension somehow magically, and I will come back to it. And on the other hand, individuals of the same species will get acquired to the telos, to the ultimate telos of their species, through the elan of usefulness. The impression, this elan gives the impression that the body or the matter is there just to be highly subordinated to the activity of mind. Yes, we know for Peirce, matter is a kind of mind, but is it really, we still have remnants of Cartesianism when we think that there is no, the cogito, Cartesian cogito is still there, and this the matter just follows the developments that can be found in mind. Matter is just a decayed sort of mind for Peirce. So again, agonism that I'm trying to identify in Peirce semiotics, on one hand, it is present because he talks about theater of the controversies, even at the level of the cellular level. So this is amazing because before quantum physics, somebody can say there is a tension there in the matter, tension at the core of the matter, at the level of the biology. But on the other hand, he tries to focus on something else. Maybe because, as we will see here in the next, what matters more for him is the coherence of this world. So, yes, elan keeps the originality of youth and is connected with the sympathy for the telos of a species. And this sympathy for the telos of the species, given the elan in the individuals, is transmitted through sexual reproduction. Unfortunately, this elan tends to be lost in the wear of advancing age, and Peirce says precisely when it's more needed. So the animals in the animal realm, this elan loses its weight, and so even if it's more needed, but there is no problem because there is new offsprings that will continue the telos of the species. So, and I give several quotations. I would like to go a little bit further, a little bit faster. The agapastic intergenerational transmission, it happens because of the bestowal of spontaneous energy by the parents upon the offspring, and second, the disposition of the latter to catch the general idea of those about it, and thus to subserve the general purpose. Exactly what I explained just now. So usefulness for Peirce is a key factor in the preservation of the elan, and on the other hand, it is preferred state of being of the sign. Therefore, I consider Peirce as over-optimistic, because that's why I think in a kind of magic way, agapasm will eventually find a way to solve the problem of the wear of receptivity in the biological being. So perhaps, although there is tension, there is agon in Peirce, this is not a big problem, because this is my interpretation, the sign remains agonistically young. As long as this tension is transmitted through young offsprings, there is no problem. What is the debatable thing is that there is not enough space for failure. For Peirce, death, corruption are mere accidents or secondary phenomena. This is what Peirce says. And everywhere there is, I quote again from Peirce, growth and increasing complexity. Again, over-optimistic, and there is a less emphasis on what will happen. What happens if there is a, when the individual, even the animal, grows old. And now, Sebeok has noticed this problem. Exactly, and Sebeok, and I bring here Sebeok discussion about the what he calls supernormal signal or superoptimal sign, because Sebeok is convinced that in his argument, precisely because even animals grow older, they develop some devices to compensate the loss of the elan, the loss of energy. While Peirce is only musing about, as I quoted, there are various forms of genius that little birds display in modeling their nests. So he's only musing about creativity. For Sebeok, this already becomes a fully fledged theory of a primary modeling capacity. So he elaborates on the species-specific capacity to reintegrate, to subserve to the general purpose, and these devices that have been formed under the pressure of fear, of decay, and death. And again, as I said, these devices appear, one strong reason is that, especially because this elan is lost, so for instance, the antlers, the horns appear because the older male needs to compensate his force, his superiority, so the younger male may back down, may not challenge his domination over the entire group. So reproductive capacity, which Peirce has emphasized, is necessary, but not sufficient to solve the problem of the decay of the elan. So what Sebeok does is a teleological reintegration for this elan through the appeal to the notion of growth or overgrowth. As again, what he calls supernormal signal or supernormal stimulus, or the superoptimal sign. And from here, there is this development that animals integrate these devices, which are overgrown, in highly complex rituals, which are assimilated throughout evolution. They're assimilated into their instinctive behavior, right? But they are rituals. They have, and this is actually quite close to Peirce, because yes, we know even for Peirce, even the natural laws are just laws that have been generated through time. There was a time when there were no such a thing as natural laws as we know them right now. What is the problem in this argument, which is very interesting? The problem is, well, not the problem with the argument, the problem that the challenge that Sebeok encounters is that, well, we have animal ethos, right, on one hand, but on the other hand, we have human culture. And human culture, things are much, much more complicated. And the examples that he gives are quite relevant, right? Anal or genital organs. They are a kind of super optimal devices. They have grown or overgrown over the human body. And yes, like in the case, as in the case of animals, they have become ritualized. But there's a great difference, because as he says, these genital or anal organs are, I quote, just those about which humankind harbors so many taboos. So this is the agonistic challenge in human culture. The many taboos that are culturally cultivated in human relationships are meant to cover, to weaken, to dissimulate, or even sometimes even completely cancel the semiotic dimension of these kind of bodily devices, which have grown over the human body or and have become all too visible. So taboos themselves have become infiltrated in the rituals. And as Sebeok and Danesi argues, sorry, I haven't mentioned Danesi in the PowerPoint, but Sebeok and Danesi argue that these rituals have been inculcated into the members of the cultures from birth. So any member of human species, depending on the culture they have been born into, they have some values, some rituals which contain taboos. So this is a different kind of specialized social ornamentation, not as simply as in the case of animals, that is not always meant to reintegrate the oversized or the visible body device, but sometimes just to make it disappear. Cover the body, cover the hair, cover the breasts, and everything that can be considered to a source of disorder in human societies. And yes, I noted Susan's concern yesterday in yesterday's presentation for the protests in Iran. And actually, this is an illustration of how deep taboos have gone into our cultures and in our postmodern societies. And it is very relevant to talk about postmodern interpretation, postmodern semiotics in this from this perspective. So the only thing that I perhaps criticize a little bit is that Sebeok seems more preoccupied with the agon of the construction of selfhood within a culture. and as if, but perhaps in other writings, in this particular context, when he talks about, the agonistic challenge of human culture, he tends to marginalize and take out of sight the agon of what I call the agon, the tension of intra-cultural clashes or intercultural clashes, and the pressure that taboos exert on the very formation of the semiotic self. Just a few words about the syntax in order to allow me to go to Deely's argument. Sebeok indeed makes reference to Peirce's theaters of consciousness, but he doesn't mention the theaters of controversy. And this is another reason why, because he's focused on consciousness, so that means his focus is the formation of individual consciousness, that's the individual interpretations that emerge in the for the semiotic being as embedded in a culture. But a focus on the theaters of controversy would have helped to widen the perspective to the idea of what Deely calls the causality proper to sign. So again, all this formation of the individual is a syntactic incantation. The formation of the semiotic self. So this syntactic incantation imposes what Sebeok says, a coherent and personal narrative schema upon each of us. I have mentioned this, I will not emphasize. I'll just say that there's more emphasis on the positive aspects of agon, poetic, historic, identitarian, numberless novel narratives, and while the negative aspects of agon, suffering, all the negative effects of that, the cultural clashes, or even the individual formation, the statut intérieur, the statue within. It's a figure of speech that he uses. It is there and it is important, but the thing is, there are many negative aspects that are not being taken into account. The suffering. So from this point of view, he rejoins Peirce because his overview of this problem is still not wide enough to focus, be attentive to the painful and suffering that are related to the agon of semiosis. Now, Deely, in my opinion, he makes a step further. And yes, everybody knows this, that Deely believes that Sebeok has been, quote, uncharacteristically hasty in his dismissal of a semiosis virtually active in the world of things. His argument of physiosemiosis is sustained by Peircean arguments of a hyperbolic universe, for instance, or the idea of that the evolution, the telos is developmental telos. As Sebeok has been preoccupied by the question of growth and overgrowth in Peirce, Deely, I see that I understand that Deely is also preoccupied by this dimension of growth and overgrowth, but his reading is quite different, and indeed he touches the notion of degeneracy and degeneracy in the physical sense. The only thing is that again, Deely becomes over-optimistic. Again, he joins rejoins Peirce and Semiotic, and thinks that degeneracy is a kind of pregeneracy. And this is opens, in my opinion, it opens the gate for what we can say the infusion of theodicy into semiotics. Maybe this is maybe you will disagree with me. Maybe you will not accept this. So theodicy being yes, most of us know basically the emergence of evil in the world is shadowed or excused or legitimized in the name of the gains, or in the name of the good that is dominant. So I think Deely overlooks the aspect that not only the semiotic animals, but also the semiotic ones, and perhaps even the inanimate beings, even the stars, even the galaxies, even the canyons, these are his examples, are the direct bearers for the entire ages of the marks of suffering, of cataclysmic activity of science that have left, that have been left behind. And this is a conception that echoes in contemporary views on ecology, which is called, yes, the Anthropocene is concerned with this idea that the whole planet is suffering because of the human activity, especially starting with the Manhattan Project, where human beings have really left their impact known even at the geological level. So, as I said, even the stars, even the mountains, you just think about that we are tearing down mountains just to take out precious resources. Entire mountains disappears, entire valleys. We are generating an incredible amount of transformation, and it's not a transformation in the constructive sense, but it's actually in the destructive sense. So yes, there is an immense amount of suffering and destruction that even inanimate things are suffering, not only animals, not only humans. And another aspect that is associated with Deely, and on which I'm a little bit cautious, is his understanding of the pure play of amusement in Peirce. Again, perhaps this is a too simplificatory reading. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's no problem. I didn't quote the text from Peirce where he talks about the pure play of amusement of the universe because it was too long. But the idea is there is a self-destructive potential of the universe. And Peirce is very aware of this because he thinks pure play has no purpose. And this is quite disturbing. But if we understand pure play, perhaps we should, yes, in the next slide I will explain a little bit more. The pure play without a telos, if we understand pure play as just another version of pregeneracy, if we understand any kind of transformation as just another way of finding new solutions, this is too optimistic. And this goes on the path of theodicy. And on its secularized version, anthropodicy, which legitimizes the human effort, the human and the human cogito, the primacy of human cogito over nature. So the agonistic challenge is, if we embrace this kind of approach, there will be, if there is no telos, there will be a final metastasis, an ultimate death of the entire universe. because the entire universe will be tricked into the agony of growth by its own play which has no purpose. Therefore, postmodern semiotic thinking, which Deely is credited for introducing, so this concept of postmodern semiotic thinking needs to take into account not only what he has called the causality proper to sign, but also the sign's living freedom. So we have to go back to Peirce and to talk about the sign's living freedom in his critique of Hegel, when he argues that reality is not an engine, is something alive, and the sign is contains not only its causality, at least this is my interpretation, but also freedom. So if the sign has not only its own proper causality, but also its own proper freedom, there is a possibility for sign or signs to resist what would appear as agonistically unstoppable. So again, using the image of the theaters of a controversy, if on the theaters of controversy, people, in the clash of opinion, one final interpretant is finally a winner, there is still a gap between this final interpretant and the causality proper to sign, and again, the freedom proper to sign. From this freedom and causality which is proper to sign, and the causality which is proper to the human-made final interpretant, are still in agonistic tension. It means the sign itself can resist its own interpretations, even if it doesn't look so obvious in a certain era, right? The witches that were the object of it's so objective, right? And he defines what is an object, the object through the idea that the witch is really an object for people, for the whole crowd, because it is objective in their minds. There's no discussion about it. And still, there's the tension between this objective understanding of the witch and the true, or may say original or free meaning of the sign itself. Yes, taboos, again, very fast, only hide an unresolved tension, and they just postpone the moment of truth, the true clash between the true agony. So when we have the fact that some witches have been hanged, burned, stoned, and etc., drowned, etc., etc., this is just a way of not to solve the tension between the sign and its and the final interpretant, human formative interpretant, but it's just a way to postpone this agon. So it is a form of agony, but it's not the clash is an agony, but it's not the agon understood in the creative and constructive sense, but it is in a destructive sense. Yes, so this repeatedly postponed agonistic encounter between the sign of the woman and the object, which was considered a witch, finally happened. And John Deely says a sea change happened. So it is a horizon of convergence. This sea change, yes, I interpret it as a horizon of convergence between the ethos of the sign and the ethos of the human culture, that which has generated finally compatible formulation with the interpretant. So the crowd, again, did not have the appropriate eyes to see in the object they conceived by the interpretation the very original and free interpretant of the sign woman. And because Deely says, what were those witches, so-called witches? And he says, innocent women. I'm going as fast as possible, okay? Now, the challenge of postmodern semiotics, and yes, if there is something I would like to contribute to this argument of postmodernity, is that, yes, we shouldn't, and it's not a correction, it's just an addition to John Deely's reflections. Not a radical, we shouldn't think about the free play in the universe as a radically free play without any telos. A telos is always needed. So instead of talking about a radically free play without a telos, we need to conceive free, not free play, but a free sign in the play of semiosis. It is, so this is an understanding of the free play, but it is read still in a Peircean way, because Peirce talks about the freedom of the sign, the vital freedom, the living freedom. So to understand this free play in the sense of the free sign in the semiotic play. And there is in this postmodern semiotic era, finally we can have a convergence of the sign's own free origin interpretant and the human-made final interpretant. And this means that this convergence will generate the horizon of the formulation of that kind of interpretant which will never become absolute or finally established, and which will maintain inside a telos, or a coherence of a hyperbolic universe. And from this point of view, I want to say that postmodern semiotics rejoins contemporary talks about postmodernity, philosophical talks about postmodernity. We have been, I think our perception is Deely's use of this term postmodern is a little bit too problematic in the context of a talk of postmodernity, a bigger, I have to say, a wider, a more popular discussion of what postmodernity is. But through this interpretation of the free play of the sign as a free sign engaged into semiosis, well, there are important bridges of discussion, of connection, of reflection between semiotic postmodernity and philosophical postmodernity as it is debated today. And to go to the third step of my argument with reference of semioethics, I will quote from John Deely, because this convergence between the free sign and the original interpretant and the final human-made interpretant has been made explicit in semioethics. And John Deely argues, and I quote in the article called Lady Welby and Lady Petrilli, the postmodern development of semiotics extends now to the practical sphere of semioethics, along with the continuing inquiry into the being and action of science through nature. So this postmodern approach, which semiotic envisages, consists in bringing back the semiotic character and roots of ethics. Ethics understood in a much wider sense, not in the very simplificatory sense as it is understood as responsibility for individual actions. So, in what aspect the talk of semioethics is relevant for what I have just mentioned here regarding cogito, the almighty cogito, I found in a very, well, maybe it's too simple to say, but I find one of the core arguments is that Susan Petrilli, getting inspiration from Victoria Wolby, understands reason, not in the cogito sense of the word, but much closer to, closer to Deely, in the sense of physiosemiosis, and much closer to the idea of the organic processes. So in the sense of digestion and in the sense of vibration. So a kind of thinking, a kind of mind, which is not Cartesian, which doesn't emphasize the subordination of matter to mind, but subordination, but a kind of constructive communication, which Petrilli has seen as a translation. So digestion that Welby and Petrilli have talked about is not understood in a kind of decomposing process, but rather it is rather a constructive phenomenon, and this reorients human reason towards what Petrilli has called corporeality or intercorporeity. So reason and body, reason and corporeality are not anymore distinguished from each other. And this is not in the sense of Peirce, that is the body or matter itself is just a form of reason. No. So we don't have this, we don't have this monism, and we don't have the dualism that is in Descartes either. Corporeality and reason are not distinguished from each other, but rather infused into each other. Since, as Petrilli has said, consciousness is incarnated consciousness. And I liked a comment of Roland Arnett on Petrilli Semiotics, and Arnett says that semiotics accounts for the reason of things. This is very, again, an important insight, but the reason of things is, again, not the reason of the structure of things. It's not the reason of the episteme, like Foucault has said. It's a reason at the level of the very intimate level, at the level of biology, and the level of, yes, at the level of even at the level of formation of stars and galaxies. And so this kind of reasoning, which is embedded in the biological entity, models and feeds. The biological entity models reasoning, and the biological entity feeds reasoning through the vibrations. So we are not only rational human beings. The things are much more complex. So that is why intercorporeity converge in the phenomenon of translation with life processes. Okay, three more. I will go very, very fast, promise. Yes, again, to go back to what we have discussed, animals reintegrate their supernormal devices through actual translation. So from this lens of semiotics, yes, animals have their own process of translation. They don't possess only the elan, which is merely dependent on reproductive devices. They also possess an ethos, and Sebeok was aware of this, and this is, I think, re-emphasized in Petrilli. And at the same time, another aspect that I would like to emphasize is that there is a compatibility of resonances between the semiotic beings and the semiotic beings. Only if there is this kind of compatibility, we can talk about a convergence of the interpretant and the freedom of the sign, and the convergence of final interpretants, human-made semiotic interpretants. And the result of this convergence between animal ethos and human ethos is, yes, agonistical. The convergence is agonistical. But the result is intercorporeal dependence, what has been at the heart of the argument present in semiotics. In what sense is intercorporeal dependence? Well, in many senses, I'll just mention predatory and symbiotic dependence. Well, yes, it makes more sense to think symbiotic, yeah. Symbiotic, interdependence, intercorporeality, okay. But why predatory? Is predatory still a kind of intercorporeality? Is it a form of agonistic communication? Is it a communication or not, the predatory relationship? Well, in effect, it is not this relationship, but in thinking about the resistance of the sign, this agon, this tension between the telos of the sign and the telos of the species and the human responsibility involved in it, we can say that these predatory roles are not rigid. And I will read a footnote from Susan Petrilli's work, which may be more, let's say, give us more insight into this. I quote, "The sheepdog's enthusiasm in guiding and guarding the flock, which he has been trained to supervise, is the translation into its converse of the wild dog's instinct to hunt, scatter, and destroy." So, yes, human semiotic being has contributed to this transformation, but in the end, the species itself has operated a kind of translation. Perhaps, and now I bring again the question of theodicy. Why not? Someday, some eras later, there will be no predatory relationship in the way we understand them today. And still animals will thrive, and still animals will have their own telos, developmental telos in the world. So the evil as we know it will disappear. But again, this is a question of theodicy. I don't want to insist on it, but I just want to emphasize that these roles, which seems for us so rigid, they are quite still, and this is in tone with what we discussed today about postmodernity. If we are really in a postmodern era, we are in, and we think we are in the postmodern semiotic era. Let's try to talk in this kind of sense and to engage with the discussion about society with this semiotic heritage. Other examples given by Susan Petrilli are the history of the licking of a dog, even a kiss, an arm around the neck or waist, of stroking, even a loving smile. So it's amazing, right? If all these, and it's a little striking for us, if all these have been at the beginning just predatory relationships, we have been, how to say, very far away from the initial tension and clashes, but there's much, how to say, there's a long way to go. Okay, and of course, mother sense. At the heart of this non-Cartesian cogito, non-Cartesian reason, so which is not a cogito, mother sense weakens the cogito's obsession for semiotic control. So gnoseological aspects are not the only incentives of the incarnated consciousness involvement in the intercorporeal milieus, but rather other aspects such as, I quote from Susan Petrilli, responsibility, freedom, dialectic dialogic answerability, and the human capacity for creativity and innovation. And this is the heart of this argument in semiotics of the unlimited responsibility of the human semiotic being, the responsibility for the whole of the universe. So this is the postmodern call in semiotics to offer more space for the development of human reasonableness, yes, but in the direction of a more intimate, primal, or maternal connection with the agonistic processes of the world. So Petrilli acknowledges that this is a noetic capacity, and indeed it corresponds to the Peircean agapic or sympathetic comprehension and recognition. So in a way, this is going beyond Peirce, but actually it comes back. It's a postmodern interpretation of a Peircean semiotics. Now, because we have mentioned Peirce, just to see the difference and the importance of mother sense, which has been introduced by Welby. As I said already before, Elan, Peircean Elan, does not seem preoccupied with the suffering, right? But at the same time, it doesn't not seem to be preoccupied with the female contribution to Elan beyond the effect of a birth, as if the female, the woman, the sign of the woman is only in this world to give birth. But what kind of birth? Birth is not just snapping in fingers. There's new individuals emerging. Birth involves pain, involves suffering. It is unfair and deeply unjust to consider this as, quote, mere accidents or secondary phenomena. So even those who are not endowed with a womb, yes, I'm so deeply sorry, I'm not endowed with a womb, and I can see this. I have seen this with experience, having experienced my wife's labor, birth, and miscarriages, unfortunately. So Peircean Elan only emphasizes mother's joy, that kind of mother or others, the joy, the happiness used with the positive aspects. But where are the pain, suffering? Where is the entire mystery of how incarnated consciousness and more generally incarnated signs come into being? This is the last one. Now, to bring together mother sense and the living freedom of the sign. Unfortunately, because those who have not been endowed with a womb have looked upon this world only from this very simplistic way, there has been a loss of, I quote, the creative and generative forces of sense characteristic to mother sense. So there has been a truncated sense of otherness, which reintegrated the differences of the woman body in a male-dominated ethos. So, and again, we go back to Welby, this time not to Peirce. And Welby has said that in all times, the sign of the woman has been there, and to influence some of men's judgments. And some of them have been called wise, other women have been called possessed. So, and Welby says, the witch of Endor, who has addressed the King Saul, to her times of where Mary Baker Eddy has been considered a kind of special, having a special gift or special possession. So male male semiotic beings have been, in a way, forced by virtue of this agonistic, not in the destructive sense of the word, but in the constructive sense of the word, agonistic tension between the sign's own causality and freedom, the sign of the woman, and their established interpretations. So the sign of the woman's marvelous presence and activity in the world has always been with those who didn't have a womb. So if a sea change, as Deely argues, has happened in the perception of women's special possession, of course, not as witches anymore, but to acknowledge the women's true generative and true contribution to all this the semiotic activity, and the unlimited responsibility for the world. So this has happened because of the living freedom of the sign of the woman, and also under the growing agonistic activity of mother sense. So, as I said, to conclude, there is a convergence between two causalities. I will have to add not only two causalities, but also two freedoms in order to go to the full extent of the semiotic postmodernity. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this brilliant lecture. Thank you. Now, I'm going to invite Dr. Elize Bisanz.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So I will not be able to put on my video because my connection, I'm currently on vacation and my connection is very weak. So I will prefer not to video with you to save all the capacity. Okay. Thank you for understanding.
No problem, no problem. Let me first introduce you, okay, very briefly. So let me introduce Dr. Bisanz, and then she will speak and share her thoughts. So Dr. Bisanz education include a Master of Arts in Philosophy from the University of Lüneburg in Germany, graduate studies in Jacques Derrida's philosophy seminars at l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, a PhD in History of Communication Sciences from the Technische University of Berlin, and a postdoc habilitation degree from the University of Lüneburg. Dr. Bisanz has published several interdisciplinary books reflecting her educational background. These include a major European edition of Peirce's writings called The Logic of Interdisciplinarity, Charles Sanders Peirce, which was realized with the aid of research and publication grants from state and private endowments. Another one called Prolegomena to a Science of Reasoning, Phaneroscopy, Semiotic, Logic, which is a collection of manuscripts by Peirce on reasoning. Another one, Overcoming the Iconic Turn, Cultural Concepts of Images, which has a title, another title in German, and you can read later in the description of the video in our website. Dr. Bisanz is a member of the advising board of the, sorry for the pronunciation, she is a member of the advising board of the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Semiotik and chair of the Society Subdivision for Cultural Studies. Since her Fulbright scholarship in 2006 at Texas Tech University, Dr. Bisanz has been an active member of the Institute for Studies in Pragmaticism. She has organized several international congresses dedicated to Peirce and interdisciplinary research. Thank you, Dr. Bisanz. No problem with your video. We can hear you very well. And feel free to share with us your thoughts and start a dialogue, possible dialogue with Dr. Untea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased and happy to be here in this circle and reflect on the presentation we just heard from Ionut. I was also happy to ask him for a draft 2 days ago, which helped me overcome these acoustic interruptions because of the weak internet I have here. So I'm sure many of you have questions and comments on the presentation, on the vast field of the presented topics. But let me begin with the very first significant contribution I see in this presentation is the triadic team, the inclusion of the triadic team of scientists it connects, namely, as you have read the title, Sebeok, Deely, and Petrilli. So all three have substantially contributed to the history and advancement of the science of science. For instance, we all know the historical importance of Sebeok's unique relationship to Lotman, one of my favorite semioticians. Without his efforts, I think the majestic power of the semiosphere might not have found the accelerated pace of scholarly awareness we have enjoyed. Also, John Deely's invaluable work on biosemiotics, especially in introducing and studying the work of Jacob von Uexküll, has revolutionized the work on science, expanding its boundaries as vast as nature itself. So I consider biosemiotics as a major scientific field to find answers to urgent questions of our time. That is a very important field we have to be very active on. So, and of course, Petrilli's semiotics to preserving and her work to preserving and advancing the work of Victoria Welby, the science of lives of science, I would call. So I also have to I want to point out what a joy to realize that all three have a common inspirational source, the work of Charles Sanders Peirce. So, but I do not consider this as a coincidence. But the active force of meaning is the core, as we all know, of Peirce's legacy. So on a second point, I would like to go to the details of the presentations. First of all, let me get rid of my thoughts on what I agree with your statements, Ionut. So you mentioned, as far as I remember, the postmodern semiotic thinking needs, quote, needs to take into account not only the causality proper to science, but the science living freedom. And also the possibility for science to resist what would agonistically appear as an unstoppable. I totally agree with that, and I will elaborate with a couple of sentences soon. So, and the second point is that in Deely, Petrilli, and I would put here postmodern in parentheses, semiotic thinking, the convergence of the original free interpretant and the final human-made interpretant are important. So I totally agree with this, and let me elaborate my reasons on this and begin with the, first of all, the major focus of your talk, the agon. As we all know, so the agon is the term for a conflict, struggle, or contest. So that's the general definition of agon. This would be any kind of contest. Let us remember that also athletics, sports, and artful expression can have agon or are displays of agon situation or agon in play. Usually in the Greek, in the ancient Greek, it was used for public festivals, so which means contests, but it is a productive and not a destructive conflict. I would like to emphasize on this, and maybe you have some, you will respond to my point. So, or the listeners, participants. So, as the forming element of the term agony, agon explains the concept of agon in tragedy by its fundamental characters and the participants who are the protagonist and an antagonist, which means that it is always there is always a dialectic relation in play. So now in Peirce's work, we find fundamental moments of that conflict. I want to mention some of those, such as the productive conflict that we experience through chance, uncertainty, doubt, belief, inquiry, and others, all these are forces in the overall play of the science, as Peirce teaches us or explains. But most of all, the agon in Peirce's work is primarily embedded, and this was mentioned in another way, in another context, in the symbolic nature of man as the meaning-creating and searching animal. So let us remember that Peirce's pragmaticism was taught as a scientific way to resolve conflicts and also to explore conjunctions of possible conflicts. So many of you know his essay. I'm sure most of you have read it, the famous essay, The Fixation of Belief. There he explains that the irritation of doubt causes a struggle to attain a state of belief. So even in something intrinsically stable, such as solid belief, can be irritated by doubt, by a conflict, which causes a conflict, which is in itself the only immediate motive for the struggle to attain belief. So with the doubt, Peirce says, the struggle begins, and with the cessation of doubt, it ends. But we have more general agonet work in Peirce's work. The meaning and interpretation, as we heard yesterday, wonderfully explained and elaborated by my colleague Petrilli, the meaning and interpretation exploration, the symbolic process. So I would like to reflect on this from my own background, Kulturwissenschaften, and Ernst Cassirer and his group, which are totally Peircean. Humans are symbolic creatures. They explain, or the symbolic philosophy, the philosophy of symbolic forms. We are all signs, as Peirce says, but we are not aware of what it means at the moment of meaning. Meaning occurs, or the consciousness, awareness of meaning. It is an anticipated meaning in the future, which is now. Thought now, but anticipated in future. So the primary purpose of the symbolic process is to create, manufacture meaning, and at the same time, announcement and postponement of the meaning itself. So does this mean that we never encounter meaning? Do we constantly postpone the meaning event? Peirce has another answer to that. As you all know, he places this action of agon in the growth of symbols. The famous quote, symbols grow, their real meaning remains to be revealed in the future. This is the enigma of a symbol which Peirce puts into the mouth of, as maybe some of you have read, I think this is one of the funniest and most delicious pieces in his work, Emerson's Sphinx. And this is a poem by Walter Emerson. And however, the relation is also reversible. The human being is a symbol since his or her life constitutes a permanent process of inference, and only the future can reveal the meaning of this inferential process in its wholeness, in its totality, in its realization. So the reason is first, because meaning is itself of a general nature. And second, the purpose of this process consists in a certain way of creating this meaning, which, as long as the process lasts, cannot yet exist as its result. So this is a huge agon in Peirce's work. But Peirce explains whatever he may have meant, it is plain enough that all that is immediately present to a man is what is in his mind in the present instant. His whole life is in the present. But when he asks what is the content of the present instant, his question always comes too late. The present has gone by, and what remains of it is greatly metamorphosed, interpretation, and interpretant, and translated, and so on. So for those who haven't read the poem, the Sphinx, I want to quote only the last sentence when throughout this 1,000 voice, Walter Emerson describes this great dame, the universal dame, which is the Sphinx, speaks and says, quote, "Who telleth one of my meanings is master of all I am," unquote. So whoever finds the meaning of our symbolic expression also has the power to control meaning. So I would like to reflect here, mention briefly the term of responsibility, awareness, and identity. So as humans, we are forced to use symbols. That's the biggest agon in Peirce's work when we think or talk about ideas. The very notion of idea cannot exist without this postponing, without this struggle to have some meaning. And Symbols grow by being repurposed. That's also another aspect, another feature of the struggle. So I don't want to go now into the details, but meaning is the process of binding information in relation. This was also mentioned yesterday, and I must say, I would like to add to your presentation this idea of relations. And relational meaning doesn't mean the absence of meaning, but it's a non-existent real, which is even more important than the reality, materialistic reality. So it is the basic structure of its existence. And Peirce also in this context, I want to approach now that my final point very carefully. He elaborates that secondness is the predominant character of what has been done, whereas the immediate present has no character but its firstness. And the quality of what we are immediately conscious of, which is no fiction, it's of course is the firstness. The future, or in Peirce's words, what is to be as meaning can never become wholly past. So therefore we may say that meanings are inexhaustible. And in that sense, this is a positive agon, which is of course oriented to solve conflict, to resolve conflicts in a scientific way. And for that, he has a term, the thirdness. And the thirdness facilitates essential properties for meaning evolution, such as growth and surprise. So, and I would also, as a third point, I want to reflect on reading semiotics. I want to suggest that it would expand the field to read semiotics through biosemiotics, such as the ideas reflected in Vernadsky's noosphere. So where the interaction of human intelligence with geological and biological systems, geology was mentioned briefly, causes fundamental changes in the biosphere. And it is also a human responsibility to reflect on that, because it results in a new condition or sphere, which Vernadsky calls the noosphere, the Greek term for the mind or even meaning. So the noosphere is the new, and for us currently thinking of the environmental issues we have, it is still very timely, geological phenomenon on our planet. Quote, in it for the first time, man becomes a large scale of geological force. He can and must rebuild the province of his life by his work and thought, rebuild it radically in comparison with the past. Wider and wider creative possibilities open for him. So to summarize, I see the tradition or the development of semiotics very, very productive and useful in connection and through this perspective to find solutions and to find answers to the problems we have currently. So to summarize, Ionut, I would suggest maybe with a question, is it an essential? Of course, it is an essential contribution to connect all these ideas, and I congratulate you for that. But do you also see, or was it maybe unconsciously built within your talk, but never mentioned explicitly, space for triadicity? And with this question, I want to pass the word now to you, and later to maybe to the audience for further questions.
Thank you very much.
I hope you could hear me.
Very well.
Thank you so much, Elize, for this. Yes, it is very interesting how you have wrapped everything. My argument in you have been to the core of my argument, and at the same time you have added. In a very interesting way, you have added the things that I would have liked to say, but I was more concerned of focusing on the three semioticians and my message than to communicate, for instance, what is origin about agon. And thank you so much for emphasizing what agon actually, some of the major meanings of agon in the Greek, ancient Greek society, public festivals, and the fact that it was understood as a productive and not a destructive force. And this is the core of my argument. And again, the agony, the distinction between agon and agony, which has not been, perhaps I tried to emphasize many times to say, but I didn't say at the beginning, be careful, there's a distinction between agon as it is used in Greek and the agony as we use it in everyday life, in the more prosaic sense of the word, and which is still rooted in the relation between protagonist and antagonist, which is a dialectic relation. So there's indeed a lot to do in this direction, and as you said, semioethics has a lot of things to say, and I'm very glad your critical insight has acknowledged this, and at the same time, yeah, there's many things I wrote down. I thank you so much for developing this dimension that indeed there is a developing this perspective of an agonistic dimension in Peirce, and you have pointed to several aspects of Peirce's work that go in the direction of my argument. Thank you so much. It has covered what I haven't covered. At the same time that you mentioned being inspired by as you said with your own background from a Cassirer in the interpretation of symbolic work that human beings have been capable of, and you have mentioned this core idea of relation.
Yes.
Whoever has this symbolic expression, whoever has the power of symbolic expression has also the power over meaning, and meaning is a process of relation. Indeed, as in the way I tried to emphasize from taking inspiration from Susan Petrilli and Victoria Welby, the process itself of translation is not simply rational in the sense of a simplificatory sense, but truly a process of placing emphasis and existential emphasis on relation. And from this point of view, I remember Robert said yesterday or 2 days ago, I don't remember, that John Deely expressed his how to say, not regret. He wanted to say that postmodern era should have he should have called it the era of relation or something.
Relations, like yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard it from, I think, Note, the discussion between Mordin and Note. Yeah.
So this is Elize, this is very relevant. Thank you for bringing this up, because I wanted to say this during my presentation, and somehow I skipped this important aspect, because relation in our postmodern era, it is an era of relation, all kinds of relations, not only a relation between human individuals, but a relation between semiotic and non-semiotic beings, and as you emphasized, a relation between us and our planet, and so which goes up to the geological level, so up to the level of, emphasized by John Deely as physio-semiotic level. So it is a relation with the physicality of the earth, physicality of the universe, and that's why we need to develop as semiotic beings the feeling of this culture, or this the values, the ethos, because we talk about semiotics, the ethos of unlimited responsibility. And yes, I think there is space for triadicity here.
I'm glad for that.
Yes. I just think about yesterday's presentation, Susan Petrilli's presentation, and mainly, to be brief, Victoria Welby's triad of sense, meaning, and interpretation. Because if we talk about mother sense, there is already the space for this kind of grasping in both in a symbolic way and yes, in just as an opening to otherness. Yes, semiotics talks about otherness, and in my presentation I talk about, I wrote motherness as M and then other, M in between brackets. And otherness, I think it is a process of discovery through relations, which involves not only coming forth, but a kind of triadic relationship that develops over time from, yes, basic sense, then to meaning, and then to signification. And this is at the core of evolution, at the core of geological processes, at the core of the relation, and then the responsive, the responsive in the sense that response to a summoning, response to call. So yes, again, there's space for this, and yeah, it's a good source. It's a good how to say? It's a good opportunity to focus more on this. And thank you again for suggesting, giving this very important suggestions to me. Thank you again.
All right. I'm happy we agree on many points. So I don't know how to proceed. I think you will take over. The chair takes over to further questions. We have agreed already. We close our discussion. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Untea, and thank you very much, Dr. Bisanz. So before closing the broadcasting on YouTube and opening the floor to the audience present here, let me ask our audience to stay tuned, because tomorrow we have another session, another lecture, and on Saturday we'll have another lecture, and right after we'll have the closing ceremony. So stay tuned. So we are closing the broadcast on YouTube